This might physically hurt me to do.
The martial arts is quite a spectrum, I would say. It covers a lot of physical aspects, mental aspects, even emotional aspects.
Obvious.
It can influence one's life in both positive and negative ways,
Technically the truth.
if done correctly and or incorrectly. It covers such a spectrum.
This guy needs to comb his
really
beard.
Defines a martial art? Where is the line drawn between a sport and a martial art?
Whenever my beard gets to a certain length, it tends to fray quite a bit and get a bit uncontrollable.
I'm going to go a little more in depth with that in this first episode of Knowledge Drop with me, Greg Laurel. So,
bit abrupt.
Martial art. Let's just first dissect that word in and of itself. That
Someone's
concept.
still shooting fireworks out there. That's
martial
annoying.
literally just means military. For example, martial law, military law. When a military takes over the governing body, well, that's more a coup, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. A martial art is, by its core definition, a set of combative techniques generally first pioneered and used by a militaristic force, either for the purpose of conquest or
not always
defense.
military forces either. Because defense was sometimes on the front of just people that weren't military at all. So the most prime example I can immediately think of is Okinawa during feudal Japan, but everyone already goes for that one.
A lot of martial arts you see nowadays is used for either tournament or self-defense, and sometimes they are used strictly for tournament. Some schools will just teach you how to fight in a ring, and that's their choice. That's theirs.
In a way.
Still.
It depends on what you want to do. What do you want to do with
for your
it?
life on the streets. That's usually what I train in.
Technically, I've done both.
I train in the martial arts of karate and eskrima.
Talk about the guy who's overpronouncing everything.
And historical European martial arts, as well as some sport fencing on the side. Specifically saber, because that's twice as fun as epee or foil. And epee or foil you can only poke. Saber you can slash.
I still stand by that.
So twice the fun. Now, fencing itself is a sport, but it does have techniques that were grounded in martial arts. But fencing itself is a sport. So
he's repeating himself.
Where within even just fencing do we see martial arts or just a sport? Because you're wielding a sword. Make no mistake, that's a sword in your hand. Even if you're just doing...
a dirk is any improvised dagger. You can make it out of just a piece of metal. A piece of metal in your hand is a dirk. So, once again, very technically the truth.
Epee or foil. That's still a sword, and it's still ingrained in techniques that were used to wield a rapier or a small sword. A saber, same basic principle. Techniques that were meant to use a slashing sword that could also poke, like a saber, maybe even a cutlass, but that would be more gross and necessary fencing. But even so, and in historical European martial arts, you see a lot of the using weapons that were designed less for sport and more for combat.
The point of those.
But one could even argue that the foil.
You just don't even have to argue. It was used in combat. You could. It's a pokey poke.
So wherein do we draw that line between a sport and
what you use it for? Whatever you're using for it in that exact situation. There you go.
And a martial art. Or is there even a line, I wonder? Is there even a line, or is it like a spectrum?
And of course, that was set first already.
Because sure, you'll see some things that would work in a ring, but would never work on the street or in the battlefield. For example, you've got stuff in traditional martial arts that look great to judges on a form. Those are your acrobatics.
Really depends on the judges. The judge knows what you're doing. If the judge knows what you're doing, then they'll actually be a little harsher on you for doing the acrobatics.
One-on-one combat. Taking, for example, the wheel kick.
One of my worst kicks.
One in which you strike with the heel of your foot by basically turning your entire body around and hitting them with the heel. It's used a lot in media.
Movies.
You see it a lot where the guy spins around and tries to smash a guy with his heel. That's usually called.
Some people call it a roundhouse kick, but then again, some people call their roundhouse kicks wheel kicks. Some people call them.
I would only ever use that as a coup de grace.
Different systems always have different names for the same techniques. It really depends on the player.
An example of opening with a wheel kick was in The Matrix Reloaded.
When the agent,
when some agents attack,
the agent goes for that jaw-high wheel kick,
and one of them goes right up and goes straight for that wheel kick to the jaw. It's good for a surprise, sure, but I'd probably never.
There's no probably about that. I'd never do it against a trained opponent. I probably wouldn't even use that at all, just because I suck at it.
And I've got all the time in the world to get that shit ready. Now then, a martial art is a military art. You're generally learning, especially if you're in a self-defense studio, you're learning how to fight on the street.
And that, of course, depends on whether or not that place is a McDojo.
The exception to this is when you're fighting for a tournament and you're learning that at that school. They're usually schools divide themselves among that. But a martial art is ingrained in battlefield combat.
No, it's the original
So that's
purpose
where
of
you're
them.
going to see, like, so some people would argue that the most true martial art nowadays is the martial art that is known as Krav Maga, pioneered by the Israeli Special Forces. It's absolutely not a sport art. It is totally meant to kill your opponent. Make no mistake. If you're learning Krav Maga, you are learning deadly stuff.
The problem is that Krav Maga has gotten a nasty reputation in the U.S. for the same reason that karate and taekwondo both have, because of the prevalence of McDojos. You know, if ever you see somebody who's running a dojo ever say something like, we don't spar because our martial art is so deadly, then that means, that basically just means we don't spar because we don't want you finding out that what we teach is garbage. You know, sparring is absolutely important. You know, you got to be able to have that feedback. And Krav Maga has unfortunately kind of gone the way of karate and taekwondo within the U.S. of just having enough people that should not be teaching it, swindling and scamming enough people in McDojos and their 30-day black belt programs or what have you, that it has gained that kind of You know, whenever you hear Krav Maga, you're going to have the same as you would if you saw your typical karate or taekwondo place, because unfortunately a lot of them are McDojos these days, because you know the majority of people are easy enough to dupe. It really just is that simple. You don't need to dupe anyone. You don't need to dupe everyone. Just enough of them. You know, it doesn't even matter if you've got sometimes it doesn't even matter if you've got critics, because there's a non-zero amount of people that still will fall for the con. You know, one born every minute.
And I hope they make that clear on day one, that you're learning deadly stuff, because that's the point of Krav Maga. The point of Krav Maga is as true to life training as possible.
Training's great, but nothing beats the real thing.
And one could argue that that's the one remaining true martial art.
One could argue that that'd be stupid.
But that doesn't. I wouldn't say that devalues other martial arts, because they all have their place. Each has its own strengths and weaknesses.
Take a side, dude.
Hybridize strengths and weaknesses to form another.
Like have an opinion.
Judo is a sport, but it derives its combat techniques from jiu-jitsu, which is
the traditional form, not the more popular Brazilian form. It's another one of those very technically the truth things. Jiu-jitsu, the very traditional stuff was and then Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what became a subset of that has, I believe, often been shown to just be a little more all around as a grappling art. But once again, it is an exclusively grappling art, and you'll get through most days of the week just grappling. But if you're up against a wrestler as a jiu-jitsu artist, you're going to face some troubles, because jiu-jitsu guys have to already be on the ground, but wrestlers know how to get someone on the ground. So, for jiu-jitsu, you got to lure them into you.
That makes up.
Take what I say with a bit of grain of salt. The best I can do in jiu-jitsu is shrimp out, do a little hip reversal, and arm bar from guard. That's all I know how to do.
For the flaws that karate might have, where it doesn't have a lot of ground game. And that's where you see a lot of people that say, oh, jiu-jitsu is the best because no one ever expects you to take them to the ground all of a sudden. But, I mean... As
many people as do say that, there is a non-zero element of truth to it.
Even if not on the ground, there's still going to be a lot of trouble, because I believe there was one UFC fight where the guy was a very big jiu-jitsu guy, so he just laid on the ground and was like, please please come
There's
over
probably
here and
been
try to take
many
me off the ground.
like that.
And when you're a one-trick horse, that just, never liked one-trick horses.
The unfortunate thing is that sometimes just being a one-trick horse will genuinely just get you through life.
But
and it's a little frustrating by
some people
principle.
do wonder when they're going into martial arts, which one should I choose? That really does depend on what you want to do, on what you want to get out of it.
What are you looking for?
Are you looking to get fit? Well, in that case, it wasn't Shotokan, unless it was Shotokan. Yeah. Well, if you want to get fit,
the word this guy's looking for is Kyokushin.
A Shotokan style karate.
Kyokushin. That's the one that you will get fit in.
Jiu-jitsu will definitely get you fit. If you want to, Taekwondo will absolutely get you fit.
I'm pretty sure I had a brain fart on that day. I probably had the word in my head. Kyokushin, Kyokushin, Kyokushin. As soon as I got to the studio, I just went bleh.
I believe held a 4th or 5th degree black belt in Taekwondo. You cannot have a gut.
I don't remember what rank he held in it. But, you know, to quote one of my instructors, you can't have a gut in Taekwondo. I mean, you can, but you won't get far. You really just cannot be skilled in Taekwondo while having a gut. It just sort of naturally doesn't happen. Not in the way that if you have a gut, you inherently can't do it. I mean, that's more just in the vein of if you start and if you get good at it, by the natural course of just how the body works, you'll get rid of that gut because of the physical demands that, you know, legit stuff will demand of you.
You just can't, so don't even try.
I do have a mechanical keyboard in case you haven't been able to tell yet.
Try to have a gut and do Taekwondo at the same time because that would be silly and impossible.
It would be silly.
Now then, if what you're looking for is to be able to fight on the street and fight for your life, find a good Krav Maga place. They'll teach you very well.
This man says Krav Maga one more time. I'm going to kill him.
I mean, all martial arts have their place in self-defense. There's no one true martial art. They all have their strengths.
The one true martial art is martial arts.
I'm even going to do another episode later on the concept of mixed martial arts and how brilliant of an idea it is.
That's and globalization just kind of made that inevitable.
For this, make no mistake, you're also starting a journey. Like, this could be a lifelong journey you're on.
It always could.
It could take many years of your life that, let's be frank, would you be really doing anything better? But again,
I'm not sure what the context of that comment was.
Everyone should at least try it. Because everyone should at least have a basic understanding on how to defend themselves. Because even if you're not a
unironically, I do believe that the right to self-defense should be a basic human right. You know, you should be allowed to defend yourself when attacked. So I personally think that duty to retreat is garbage.
Defense kind of guy, I feel like you should at least have some knowledge. So that way, at least you've got something.
Know how to kick a guy in the balls right, you know. There's a startling amount of people who don't know how to kick correctly, and if you know how to kick correctly, you've got an advantage over a startling amount of people.
Something and nothing else. You're not just flinging your fists all over the place like an absolute madman, like you see in some of those YouTube videos that I find absolutely hilarious. And there are something.
He said as he'd never actually really actively looked at those videos, but only ever just stumbled across them. You know, it is something that's very surreal. Once you actually have once you got a bit of skill, right? It is very surreal when you see people who aren't trained being very much not trained. And you're just like, how does that even happen? How do people have such a lack of skill? You know, it can be pretty surreal. And there is Nevin. And I don't mean like the second week blues. And what I mean by that is, you know, after a couple of days and you feel like you're all the train. You know, it's the guy who says, you know, I've been training for 2 weeks and I'm already, you know, sizing everyone up and envisioning 6 different ways to kill them. Like, no. I'm not talking about that. That's actually the point where there's actually a point after you start training, which is about a month and a half in, where you actually have less skill than before you started. But then it starts going up. I could go a little more in depth about that, but I'm not sure if there's enough hours in the day right now.
Shout out, you're doing it all wrong. But I digress.
I've never personally shouted, you're doing it all wrong.
When you enroll in a studio, when you put on the white belt or dog,
as long as you're in the right studio, if that's
if you're doing
if it's the right studio, yeah, this is happening. If it's one of those McDojos, well, then this isn't what happens. But that should honestly kind of go without saying.
Krav Maga doesn't really use belts, so
some places that train in Krav Maga do adopt a belt system, just so that it's easier for everyone. But by technicality, yeah, it doesn't use a belt system. And it's not to say that anybody who uses a belt system you should have an eye on. I mean, maybe it does. I don't remember for sure. But it really just depends. And sometimes you just got to go with what common sense says.
So whenever you start, there's a definitive sort of the path has started, and ideally your instructor will show
it's not
you
even
the door
necessarily
for you
when
to
you
walk
first
through
put on the belt.
as you make your progression through this. Now, personally, I have not yet earned my showdown or first blue black belt. I'll be frank. I'm first Q, one belt away. My black belt test is in June of this year.
I do need to mention that a few months into the start of I don't remember when this was filmed, but it was like over a year ago. But in January of the year that I would have, in December and January of the year that I would have tested in June, my depression spiked majorly, and I ended up dropping out of the studio, and I never got my showdown. So that's the grain of salt you need to be taking with anything I say here. And I'm not a liar. I don't like being a liar. Sometimes I've done it. It's not fun.
Yet because I know my capabilities. I know I can't say better because I'm trying to stay humble, but make no mistake, I can hold my own. But then again, if I say that, someone's probably going to want to challenge me. But
it's a paradox of pretension. Whenever you say something like that, like honestly, even back then and even now, I was thinking, just about how there's this kind of collectively very Catholic view of qualification and ability that's basically like, you're not allowed to say that you're good at something. And if you do try to say I can do this, or I am good at this, or I am capable of doing that, what have you, how many people are going to come out of the woodwork to tell you otherwise? I've actually recognized a specific logical fallacy, and I call it the "there are no fighters" fallacy, wherein somebody argues against somebody's qualifications or skill at a given thing by basically saying, you're not qualified to speak on that because you're anything but a master, right? This is sort of the baseline of qualification borders on perfection when it comes to making the, sort of there are no fighters argument. And it doesn't just apply to martial arts, it applies to other things. Like if I say, don't use a dovetail joint on soft wood, it will never work. Someone might tell me, but you're not like a master carpenter, you can't say that, you're not qualified. I just realized they sometimes call that the no true Scotsman fallacy. I just remembered that. And that's practically what that is right there.
I've really gone off on a bit of a tangent, haven't I? I started with what is a martial art, now I'm at
it happens.
Should you do martial arts? I think you should at least try.
I sometimes do multi-level tangents even. Those are scary.
A martial art, even if it is just going to the YMCA for one of their...
As long as you can find a good studio.
Classes or something. I don't know what they actually do at the YMCA. It's probably like a sport type.
Even if it's just a gym with a punching bag, it's better than nothing. And in fact, some people, the internet exists, so you can look up who the reputable sources of this information are and watch videos from them. I think Scott Adkins posts videos instructionally or something. Maybe I don't remember for sure. I think Michael Jai White does too. You can look up who are these reliable sources. You can use common sense and eventually figure it out. And I suppose I would even say I would rather, only have a hanging bag in my garage than a bad studio. Because at the very least I can do something without being... Because it takes twice as long to unlearn something as it does to learn it. So if you're learning bad habits, that's worse than just not learning at all. But, and to each their own, and whatever you figure you end up having to do is whatever you end up figuring you have to do. I can only speak for me. And I can suggest to others, but other than that.
Even if you're planning on devoting your life to this, I don't
Don't plan to devote your life to it, honestly. If you plan to devote your life to it, you're gonna fail. happen to devote your life to it, just so happen to
You start that journey,
just go nuts on it, just happen
you really
to.
are like making a commitment, unless you aren't. And if you do make that commitment, it's
Dude,
very
have an
much
opinion.
worth it if you see it through. If you do ever one day put on that black belt,
I'll
I
bet.
challenge you to
I'll
think
bet.
whether or not that was worth it. And I challenge you to tell me, I wish I didn't do this. Because about 1%, less than 1% of the people who ever start in martial arts end up with a first degree black belt. So if you...
And even including just McDojos in general, that's still not far off. Even McDojos require a non-zero amount of time, even if that non-zero amount of time is 1.
Get that first degree black belt, you've already gone farther than 99% of the people who ever have donned a belt or equivalent thereof. If you're like in wushu, like a sash, because wushu or generally.
I'm not even sure if Wushu does, like, sashes for rank. I think it's, like, for just skills. I don't know.
Literally just means to have skill. So anybody can have kung fu.
And how many people have already made that obnoxious point, Radian?
Now then.
One of my friends, whose father was very skilled in Wushu, said that said that his dad was going to open up a studio called Wushu Kung Fu because he was just, and the joke was it's called Kung Fu or whatever. That was the joke.
When you're doing this, when you're in this journey, it's going to be hell for a while. Like, there's going to be points where you hate your instructor. I know I've been there. There's going to be points where you don't want to walk through that door. I've had them, but
I honestly
where I train, I've made a door, but I've never actually regretted.
And that just depends on where you train. Sometimes, if the place that you're going to makes you regret walking through that door, then that probably means you should be stopping because you're probably not at a good place.
Martial arts just means military.
No, probably about it. You are just.
It's derived from a militaristic force or a defensive force, whether to conquer or prevent conquest.
And that's what a good place
For
should.
Example, in karate or the weapon system Kobudo, it was pioneered on the island of Okinawa, south of Japan. The Okinawan farmers and fishermen developed karate.
You're not even 2/3 of the way through. You sound like you're wrapping up.
In their native language, karate was kind of an adaptation to get the Japanese to accept the martial art.
This is stuff that everyone knows. You can honestly skip through this part. This is.
Purpose. But anyways, when they
it was Tei. The original form was Tei.
It was to prevent them from being conquered by the samurai. They repurposed their.
Once again, this is stuff you can all learn from sources that are way more versed on this history than me.
For example, the nunchaku used to be.
And you could look up the Wikipedia on the history of karate.
The nunchaku were used to knock fruit down from trees. It is also mostly because of globalization, and that really is just a problem.
I think I just said that earlier too.
The world that we now live in. For example, if I take the Filipino martial arts, like say Eskrima, Kali, modern Arnis. There used to be very stark differences between them, but now you'll probably see that they teach about the same techniques, but with just different emphasis.
Not necessarily stark difference, not full on, but
kicks, just with different foci. Taekwondo will focus like 90% on kicks. Karate will focus maybe 70% on hand technique.
There's only so many different ways that a human body can move itself. There's going to be similarities.
Because Taekwondo, their emphasis on the foot derives from the fact that a foot is far more powerful and has a lot more reach than your hand. And karate might focus more on hand.
To each their own.
Because the hand is often faster than the foot, depending on who's trained in what. Even so.
Everything depends on everything. Come on, dude, have an opinion.
And that's just because, geographically speaking, the Korea and Japan.
The Korea and the Japan.
Globalization as it is now.
Goodness.
It's even easier to blend the two together.
A
karate guy like myself has gone to a Taekwondo tournament and taken second place before.
Yes, that did happen once.
And in their forms.
I actually remember they had to group me with some higher ranks because there weren't enough people in that division to have 3. And there were, because I actually remember at that tournament they had to group me into a division higher because there were only like 2 people in that division initially in my division. So they basically had to merge them because otherwise there practically was no competition. It would just be the two of us. So they said, is it all right if we do this? And we both said, yeah, sure. We'll go up with the just under black belts, and I was around the middle range. I was blue belt at the time, which is a little higher than middle, but these were brown belts. And I said, all right, yeah, that's fair. Do what you got to do. And then I did eventually play second. That was in the forms. The sparring was not a similar case.
Similarities within, say, between say the Tobosa Kali and say Doce Pares, also known as 12 pairs. You're going to see similarities. Your strike.
Whenever you do anything, you're going to be similarities.
But there might be a different emphasis. There might be you might be in for.
I didn't study Doce Pares. I studied Tobosa, so right now this is totally just guessing.
In say another style, not necessarily Doce Pares, you might be aiming for head, neck, sternum.
Everything depends on everything, right?
The Philippines is a big place, and there's a lot of islands.
A place is a big place.
Eskrima was probably one's very different from the other, from the neighboring.
My scars, those scars were not healed yet.
How much the world is connected now, the FMA, as it's sometimes called, Filipino martial arts, have really kind of blended into.
I still get genuinely confused when people say FMA and they actually made an anime.
This big umbrella that is the modern Kali, Eskrima, Arnis, whatever you prefer to call it. And for the record, I do prefer the spelling of Eskrima than Escrima, even though the studio I train at uses the C. It's kind of peeved me for a while, but frankly...
It's because K was the original one, and I'm a bit pretentious sometimes about spelling and pronunciation.
Anyways, even in Western arts, like Savate and Dutch kickboxing, you're going to see a lot of similarities.
The reason I mentioned Savate, and probably will mention Savate a lot more times, is because of how sick I am of hearing about, the French memes of we surrender, and right now the U.S. is going through its equivalent of France's We Surrendered, with all of its shame and all of its how tired we're all going to be of hearing about it, And Savate is a very brutal kickboxing art that's very kick-heavy, and it's a French one, and, whenever someone says, oh, the French are weak, and I'm like, hello, Savate, Savate would like to have a word with you.
Between them, and
I am not French by any means. My ancestry does not go there.
Is, geographically much smaller than Asia, so that's why you see more.
Well, if you've looked at a map.
Like Oceania.
This is really hard for me to continue going through, especially on the history parts, because this is parts that...
Make no mistake.
I'll just explain some more in a bit.
Really annoying.
Water is annoying.
And I can get into all sorts of rage about salt water and just the very fact that it exists. But that's
yes, I can. I can ramble for why salt water is annoying as hell.
Say a martial art that focuses on weapons as much as empty hand, like Eskrima, because in Eskrima they often teach you weapon techniques first. They often teach you the stick techniques and the knife techniques before they teach you empty hand. And the point of them is that they all flow together. Like, you can do with a stick what you can do with a knife, what you can do with your empty hand, or a machete, or a spear, or a staff.
It kind of is the point,
They all kind of coexist amongst each other and do the same techniques. Some martial arts, you have like a technique with the staff. Take that staff away. You can't exactly do that with your empty hands. But in Eskrima, you smack them with your stick. You lose your stick. All right, now I'll just chop you in the collarbones. And that's the emphasis.
If you trained up your hands hard enough, collarbones are not difficult to break, but still.
That's so weird.
Well, okay, so I'm right at this moment. I was probably thinking more of the Chris style dagger. That's more like I can't because my left shoulder is injured right now. But I think I was thinking more about the Chris dagger, whichever one that was, not the actual full on sword, because the full on sword that was a Chris. You could do slashes with it, but there was like a dagger form of it that I think I had seen before the sword proper. That's the one I was thinking of, the one that just looked really odd, and I was like, how would you even? It seems structurally unstable with all that waviness to it.
Motion, because
but
poison too, but that's a whole other thing.
Were they? I don't know.
And I think
I heard somewhere they were.
As far as like what is a martial art versus what is a sport.
Oh, please tell me he's almost done.
I suppose. because
No, you can't.
sports
Don't.
can derive from the martial arts, but can martial arts derive from sports? Because
Not necessarily, but yes, necessarily. You know, once again, no. Actually, no, because it always just depends on what you're doing with it. It's,
can you take a
everything is
sport
everything, and this guy doesn't have an opinion or stance.
Sure, you can. Like, you can take the principles of tackling somebody in football and say apply that to a wrestling match or a pancration match with wrestling.
Or just a self-defense situation.
But even so,
You know, if you know how to blindside somebody with a tackle.
Because football tackles are like these giant, full-on, and if you miss, you're just going to go flying over there and like bay. But
you know, but if it works,
sports,
nothing wrong with it.
Whatever sport that does have an inherent risk of injury by the hands or feet of another person probably derived its initial techniques and ways that it got about doing things from martial arts.
Or the fact that people got bored.
Strike
Martial arts probably derived from the fact that people got bored. You know, literally everything happened because people got bored. Apex predators are the only ones that actually start experimenting and getting bored. Once you stop solely worrying about survival, that's when you can get bored. And then everything just goes downhill from there.
So, for example, if in fencing I do this strike, I can probably easily do that strike again with a dagger. If you were trained by the Italians, maybe you hide that dagger behind your back, and you're just like, oh yes, I'm fencing you very well.
Ouch.
No
Yikes.
Italians, they make great rapiers. Make no mistake, they look great. Like, yeah, moving on.
Rapiers are one of those things that I personally suck at, but I would love to know how to make.
You have these sports that derive from them. I mean, I can't really consider the blending too much. I don't want to go too far into the whole everything is one, all is one, because that's like a...
You're a bit too late for that, buddy.
I don't necessarily follow unless I do.
So as I edit this, I just noticed that from the point I said, it's a little too late for that, buddy, in commenting how prior me had said that he was trying to not do the all is one stuff. I lost all the reaction footage after that. But the point is, you know, there wasn't really even much you missed. It was just me complaining about how long he was droning on for. But, you know, this wasn't scripted. None of it was. And I guess it obviously shows. But, you know, sometimes, you know, me now wishes that I had done a little more outlining and a little more stuff. But the problem is that I had plenty of time back then, and I just thought I could wing it. But, you know, credit where it's due. That guy was a lot more ambitious than me, and he was very much willing to put something out and put himself out there and, you know, say these things that, you know, probably will get a lot of flack for their lack of qualification, but, you know, he was at least willing to do it, and that's better than what I can right now say. So take that grain of salt with it, along with the veritable mountain of salt you're already taking this with.